Paranormal or not, what is the scariest, creepiest or most unsettling experience of your life? When I was in high school, to earn extra money, I went and cleaned my dad's boss's office building on the weekends. Most of the time it was just me in there. Occasionally, someone would be in there working. It was never full though. Usually, if anyone was there, it was this one dude. I still don't know what he did there, but his office was way in the back of the building, almost in what I would call a closet. This was a construction company, and they had this big office with a giant table in it where they could spread out blueprints and go over them together. This guy's office was in a closet behind this office. I worked there for years, and as I did, I kinda got to know this guy. I eventually bought myself a Jeep Wrangler when I turned 16, and he was a Jeep guy himself, so we would always BS about Jeep stuff. Honestly, a really cool dude. The one thing that always stuck out to me about this guy is he had this stick, nothing weird, but noticeable. When he was standing and talking to you, he always stood with his left side facing you, with his left hand in his pocket, and he would jingle his change in his pocket. Well, the guy eventually died in the office one day. Not while I was there, during the work week. I remember my dad telling me about it and offering to let me go to the funeral, which I did. A few weeks later, I'm in there cleaning. I'm not in the blueprint room, but in a room across the hall, and I hear the front door open. They had a sensor on the door that made a loud ding noise when someone opened it. So, I heard ding. And could hear footsteps walking in. So, I'm sitting at this desk, dusting all this person's knickknacks, and I hear that guy's voice say, "Hey, Jibby, how's the Jeep running?" I'm kinda shocked and just staring at this person in the doorway, left side facing me, and jingling change in his pocket. I'm pretty much frozen in the chair just staring at him, and he kinda laughs a little. It seemed like he was about to walk away, and I kinda shuddered a second once everything registered in my brain. So, I blinked, and when I looked back at the door, he was gone. I walked around the entire office and no one was there. From that day on, anytime I went into his office, I said out loud, "Hey, wish you could see what I've done with the Jeep," or something else like that. Always felt like he was in there still. Dad has since retired from work, and I don't get to go up to that office anymore. But, on the off chance I do, I like to walk in that office, it's their gym now, and say hello. I was about 16 and at this girl's house for a hookup type thing. We start getting to second base, when she says, "Go away, Grandpa." Confused as hell, I ask her what she meant. She said her grandfather died in the room, in the bed we were doing shit on, and he tried to join us. I noped out of Grandpa's house of horrors and never called her again. Working on a school report late at night in my ground level bedroom. Glance up and stare at my reflection in the glass of the window. Realize it's not my reflection. That someone is actually staring in at me, watching me from outside the house. Shudder. Still gives me chills. I was playing with my friend at a playground near my house. It was around dusk and we had been there for about an hour, when we both stopped and immediately sprinted back to my house without saying a word to each other. Turns out we had both had the same dark, terrible feeling in our gut and knew we had to get out of there. The next morning we went back and found a cat head in the playground, just the skull and fur, nothing else, no brain or eyes or anything. We think it might have been a mountain lion as they are prevalent in our area. It's hard to explain that awful gut feeling, but I've never been so scared without being in any noticeable danger in my life. This is pretty silly actually. When I was a kid, I had a Barbie that came with a little baby. This baby unsettled me for some reason, something about its face was spooky. One day, I stopped playing and started to walk out of my bedroom, but something compelled me to go back to turn the baby's face away from me first. I went to the bathroom, came back, and the baby's face had somehow turned back to its original position, facing me. Understandably, I had an absolute fit. I cried to my mom and she told me that she had gone in my room and moved the doll, but later admitted that she lied to stop my hysterics. We hid the blasted thing, but it would re-emerge every couple of years. I think it's funny now, but I still wonder. My sister and I each got a doll when I was around 7. The baby kind with baby clothes, side by side and kept right by our beds. My mom started noticing that every morning their heads would turn. I don't remember if they were towards us or away. Eventually, she announced that if they turned again she's going to trash them. The next morning both their heads didn't move. Mom trashed them. I'm creeped out that this happened to you too. 7 to 8 years old me visited my grandparents in the countryside. According to my grandmother, she woke up in the middle of the night to her cow's abnormal mooing, went outside to check and saw me walking into the fish pond. I did not wake up upon entering the water. She barely pulled me out of the water before I fell into the deep part of the pond. I was shaking uncontrollably. She had to carry me inside. It took half an hour to wake me up. When asked what happened, apparently half-conscious me answered I was following the pony. I live in an apartment with 6 of my girlfriends. One day, all of my roommates went to a concert except for me and one other. We went to pick them up, got home around 11 p.m., and ordered pizza. About 20 minutes after ordering I hear a knock at the door, and I assume it's the pizza being delivered. Instead, it's this random man I've never seen before, telling me that he watched us get out of the car and would like to come in to talk to us as we are all beautiful. Keep in mind it is 11:30 at night on a Sunday. He started to angle his body closer to the door. So then my roommate's boyfriend came to the door where he was visibly shocked, uncomfortable and started to fidget. After telling him to get off, we realized he followed us home from the concert. Being a woman can suck sometimes. I was at a party in high school. Nothing big, 3 girls, 4 guys, and our host's stepbrother and stepbrother's girlfriend. Wasn't really a party per se, we were just snacking and watching a movie. Anyway, one moment the stepbrother gets up and walks to his room. Our host follows out of the room then comes back saying we need to leave. Apparently the stepbrother grabbed his gun and told our host that if we didn't leave he was going to kill us all. It was literally insane. He seemed like a regular dude, and I don't think anyone detected anything wrong. It was scary to see a total 180 like that. Also, the fact that he was unstable and was armed. I was babysitting this little kid, and we decided to go on a walk. We saw this creepy-looking abandoned house down the street. The windows were all smashed. The kid pointed up at the house and asked me, virtual IRL, why is that man staring at us? I said what man? He said don't you see him? He's inside the house. I just got really freaked out and said that we should go back home. We practically ran back to his house. Let me preface by saying I have only told this story to 3 or 4 people my entire life, and none of them believed me. I am aware I will sound crazy, but I swear to you this 100% happened to me when I was about 13 years old. Yes, I am sure I was not dreaming. No, we did not have a gas leak. When I was about 13 years old, I was having trouble sleeping. It was probably 1 a.m. or thereabouts. I was restless, tossing and turning, the whole bit. Well, I had almost given up and was just staring blankly at the wall next to my bedroom door, when the door begins to open, slowly. Now, we had a cat at this time, so the door not being properly closed and then pushed open by a feline friend would not have been outside of the norm, so at this point I'm still calm. But then I take a look into the opening gap between the door and the frame. Through the gap is a man in a black coat of some kind, with a white mask over his face, who is humming very soft and low. I immediately gasp, trying not to scream, and pull the covers over my face. My heart is racing and I'm listening for anything, any little movement. I don't hear anything, but I begin to hear that humming again and through my blanket make out a soft, amber light. I decide this change may signal more immediate danger, so I summon all my courage and pull the covers down off my face. He's gone. I look around the room and the man is no longer there. From outside, however, I see that same amber light. I walk, slowly, tensely over to the window and peer out. Hanging in the air, at the same level as my second-floor bedroom window is a little orb of amber light which, although featureless, makes a bounce-like motion that I understand this sounds crazy, took to mean as it acknowledging me. It then moved through the air toward the tree line in back of our house and disappeared. I still wonder what it is I saw. My husband and I moved away so he could finish his degree at a more reputable university. His uncle happens to live in the same town as the school. We would hang out with his uncle and grill out, watch movies and play his really nice instruments. Really nice guy overall and someone 2 broke college-aged kids could lean on if needed in a town where we knew no one. His uncle's friends started coming to some of our little shindigs. All was well with his uncle's friend, except for a few flirtatious comments, which I just shrugged off. He was about 20 years older than me. I was a girl in my early 20s. I thought maybe it was his personality. I was working in property management and the friend told me he was looking for a new apartment. Seeing a business opportunity and a chance to help a family friend, I gave him my business card. About a week later, His uncle's friend comes into my office. I was happy to see him, assuming he was looking for an apartment. Nope. He proceeds to hand me a 3-page typed letter which is folded and tells me this is probably the last time you will ever see me. He turned around and left. No explanation, so I read the letter. The letter basically declared his love for me and stated his intentions to win me over. It said something along the lines of him beating my husband in karate. Also, he went on about how the men in my husband's family are basically damaged and it wouldn't work between my husband and I. He said it was a warning. It was a deranged rambling from a man I encountered maybe 4 times in my life. Startled at my desk, I told my manager, who I was pretty close with, so he was aware of the situation. That afternoon my husband and I went to the police station to put the letter on file. Luckily I've never encountered that guy again. But now I think twice about handing out my business cards. Visual hallucinations brought on by the wrong combo of psych meds gave me by far the scariest and most unsettling experiences of my life. The unsettling part was losing my reading comprehension skills. I'd read a comment on the discussion board I was frequenting at the time and it could say something as benign as, "I had a lovely breakfast, have a great day," and I'd read it as abort, retry, implode, you're a failure, you should die. So I'd write this angry response ripping the person a new one, and then I'd get these sometimes apologetic, sometimes "WTF is wrong with you?" responses in my inbox, and I'd be totally confused. The scariest was looking in the mirror and realizing I looked evil. I wouldn't say demonic, but the way I was smiling in my eyes. I looked so evil it was terrifying, kind of like something else had control of my face and I was seeing me, but not me. I know it probably doesn't make sense, but it scared the shit out of me. I was laying in bed trying to get my daughter to go to sleep and she was refusing to. As I was getting more annoyed with her, I asked, "Why won't you go to sleep?" Her response was, "Because those 2 people are watching us," and pointed to the corner of the room where no one was stood. We were alone in the house. Immediately picked her up and spent the night asleep downstairs. My wife and I bought a house in 2011 that had been vacant for 13 years prior. We renovated right away and then moved in. Our 1-year-old daughter began acting as though she was terrified of someone or something my wife and I could not see or hear. More concerned for my daughter's safety than my own insecurities about whether or not ghosts are real, I pursued that option so as to rule it out. Long story short, a medium cleared the house out of the kindness of his heart. He didn't want anything, but we made him dinner. Sure enough, my young daughter's behavior shifted that night. And a 1-year-old just doesn't have the ability to comprehend what he was doing. Hell, I barely comprehended it. Kids are wide open and really just respond to the stimulus in their environment. My life hasn't been the same since that experience. I moved into a new place in a new county. After a night at the pub, I got the feeling I was being followed. Turned around, huge black dog with red eyes glaring at me. I ran home, locked the doors. Then I started getting nightmares about the thing hunting me down. And every time I was out at night, it was getting closer and closer. I put it down to the stress of moving, well, until a friend of mine stayed the night to ease my mind. I found her awake at 3 a.m. looking out the window, dog outside. She was pale as a sheet. She just whispered, "That's a hellhound." In the morning, she ran out of my house, came back a few hours later with this awful smelling powder, and hung it up in pouches around the room, with an extra pouch for me to carry. Never seen the dog again. Never had a nightmare about it since. When I was 10, I had vivid dreams of a shadow person with red eyes staring at me through my window. Now, at the time, I had a little gargoyle statue I kept outside because my mom said it would protect the house from demons. But only if it was outside. Me being me, decided to take it in and play with it. But I left it in my parents' room, on the dresser. A week later, I overheard my dad telling my mom about a nightmare he had. Said he saw a man with red eyes just staring into the bedroom, but a weird-looking creature was staring back at it. He said it was as if the man wanted to enter the room but couldn't. This freaked me out and I brought the gargoyle back outside. Sleep paralysis is very common in my dad's side of the family. That look that a certain client of mine has after he has a seizure. It is like he is both dead behind the eyes, and at the same time fearing for his life. It's really hard to describe in any way other than that. That time I believed the government were listening to every conversation and the New World Order was an imminent threat for months. The whole thing cumulated with me trying to dig a tracking chip out of my arm and having to be held down. Only severe episode of psychosis I've ever had, still afraid that it'll come back. I found out that one of my best friends for 2 years had a crack addiction. Was at a party at his place when a shady guy shows up and they disappear upstairs. He comes back downstairs looking like Gomer Pyle when he lost his mind. I didn't know why he was acting all strange, and another friend of his who knew told me we needed to leave. We took off and he told me later, and I was stunned and freaked out. There is a road near where I live that is famous for paranormal activity. It's called Blue Mist Road, and its name is very accurate. At night, no matter the weather, there is what appears to be a thick blue fog moving along the ground. I've never actually seen anything personally, but we did hear muffled voices and what sounded like footsteps in the dense tree line right next to us. We tucked tail and took off. I have no problem with cemeteries, hospitals, funeral homes, etc., but the place that creeped me out the most was the wrecker yard. My husband was involved in a 5-car accident where 2 people died. We went to the wrecker lot to get some stuff out of the car. I have never felt that uneasy at a place, just the vibe. I could just feel something was off. A friend of mine from high school and I were dating 2 sisters from another school we had met at a summer camp. They were driving to us to go on a date to see a musical in town. We had planned to meet at a local sandwich place to eat first. I had driven both me and my friend there to save gas, and we were waiting in the parking lot. The restaurant was in a strip mall that also included a popular sports bar. While we were waiting, a man walked out of the bar incredibly intoxicated. It was pretty clear that he was on something other than just alcohol. He stumbled around the parking lot and walked up to our car. This guy pressed his face up against my driver's side window and started mumbling with a threatening look on his face. I couldn't hear a word he said, but we locked the doors so he couldn't get in. He then proceeded to do this weird, frustrated stumbling around the parking lot, lifting up his shirt and ranting. He went back and forth between my window and stumbling like this several times. After a couple of minutes of this, my girlfriend called to ask for directions on where to go. This was before phone GPS. I'm giving her directions on where to meet us. All of a sudden, the guy points at the hood ornament on my car, freaks out, then rushes at the windshield and bashes a crater into the glass with his bare hand. I yelled "oh shit" into the phone and hung up, which scared the shit out of my girlfriend. The guy's girlfriend drives up beside us, grabs the guy, and pushes him into their car before driving off. My friend got the license plates. Our girlfriends show up and we're a little dazed by it all. We call the police. They take our statement as well as some witnesses from inside the bar. Apparently, the guy had been kicked out for being too intoxicated and also having run out of money to pay for drinks. I had to call my mom because it was her car and we had no way of getting home after that. Luckily she was also in town to see the musical as well. A week or so later the police contact us about the incident. Apparently, no charges would be pressed and they had to stop their investigation. The guy was a Native American living on a reservation, which is beyond the jurisdiction of police to investigate. To our knowledge, he faced no consequences and we had to pay to replace the windshield out of pocket. When my son was 2, I'd carry him upstairs to put him to bed for the night. He would always look over my shoulder, waving at the front of the living room and say "night night grandma," but there was no one there. Fast forward 6 months, I learned that the lady who owned the house before use had passed away in the exact spot my son would be waving at. I don't live there anymore. Scary in the moment, scarier after, was hanging out in a park drinking with some friends and these random 3 guys come by and start chatting with us. Mainly me. Only guy. I offer them my alcohol as I don't want it. We chat more. They start walking away and I'm in mid-conversation with a guy, so I walk with them a bit and the guy turns me to and says, "What are you gonna do?" Before I knew it, they had met up with other guys behind me and there's 6 guys around me, punching and pushing. I get knocked in my face pretty good and go down. They continue kicking and walk away. I get up furious and break an empty bottle and they start yelling things, while the girls realize what just happened and surround me and bring me to the closest guy's house. They come back with 20+ people, girls, guys, and we had already called them cops. Cops catch about 5, 2 of the main guys I was talking to. Turns out they had knives on them. Scary/lucky enough nothing worse happened to me except a black eye and a few cuts. A year later one of the guys goes to prison for murder. Sent a chill down my spine that I almost got in a fight, rather than a beat down, with the murderer. When my mom was a kid, she had this horrible stuffed clown with a plastic face. One day my brothers and I, brought it home from my grandparents' house. Not sure why. We hated the thing. It was obviously creepy as all hell. Once it was home, it would move from where we put it. You would leave it on the chair, leave the room, come back, it would be on the bed. We decided to take it and put it in a box, and put weights on top of the box. We came back and it had moved the weights as the box, and was sitting in the chair. This was in the basement, so no one would have been able to get to it without going down the stairs, which is the way we exited and entered. We then left the room again with it on the chair. Came back and it was outside the house, staring into the basement window. There is no way it could have got out the window, didn't open, or passed us on the stairs. We then gave it a book and a pen and left the room. It wrote on the front of the book, it was a kid's book about Houdini, I'll never forget it, the name Mike Staffer in almost movie-style scratchy scrawls writing, most horrifying thing I've ever encountered. We told my parents and they destroyed it. My dad used to work at an OXXO, when I was like 9. It's a gas station in Mexico. He worked night shifts and the stores stayed open 24/7. Nighttime in Mexico is when it gets bad and when everybody goes inside, and it is when all the cartels and Marines come out, and if they run into each other there's a shootout that's for sure going to happen. Well, one night at about 2 a.m. 3 trucks pulled up and everybody got off, about 14 men in body armor, gloves, boots, black cargo pants, leaving all of their doors open blasting narco corridos. It was the Zeta cartel. I remember being scared shitless and our dad told us to just stay quiet. I thought we were gonna take my brother since they would kidnap young guys and send them to work with them, and thought my dad was gonna have a gun pointed at him since he was the one behind the register. Some of the men waited outside with their M16s and about 6 walked in with no noticeable weapons and bought a bunch of chips, bread, beer, drinks, sodas, candy. I remember expecting for them to walk out with all of the stuff without paying, but they paid for it all and let my dad keep the change. My brother and I then helped them put the bags in their trucks for some reason, and when we did we set them on top of their grenades, all types of rifles and pistols. Then they just got back in and drove off. Oh, and there was a guard that worked there at some point and my bro and I were cool with him, and sometimes we would chill outside and the guard would mess with the payphones that were against the store's wall and pretend to flirt with the operator lady. Well, one day he did that while some cartel members were there and they thought he was calling the people above him to tell them that the cartel was there. So they snatched him up and we never heard of him again. I worked in a private club at the top of a big hotel. I came in one day and our linens had just been delivered. And all of our linen bags reeked like gasoline. Everyone thought it was strange. It was kind of a slow night and I was working on the bar side. It has really long hallways. All night long I kept seeing flashes of a man out of the corner of my eye. When I was bringing dishes back to the kitchen it felt like someone was walking behind me. I thought I was just being paranoid. There were rumors of it being haunted and it wasn't the first time I saw something weird. After we closed I was setting up the bar for the next day's lunch and my coworker came over to talk to me. He mentioned that he kept seeing a man out of the corner of his eye and felt like someone was standing behind him most of the night. I hadn't said anything to anyone about it until he brought it up. It freaked us both out, so we worked together the rest of the night. Turns out that over the weekend the linen company we used had a truck flip and catch on fire and the driver got ejected and died. They brought us the bags and linens from his truck without having re-washed them first. We found out the next day why the linen bags smelled. The summer before senior year, I had the opportunity to go visit family in Austria. I went with my uncle and grandmother to go see them. I was 17 and a huge history buff, so I took a weekend, borrowed one of the cars illegally and drove 5 hours to Poland to visit Auschwitz to see the horror that took place there. Standing there at the entrance gate I felt the cold chill strike my core. I spent the whole time in silence. It was truly the most unsettling day in my life. More recently, I went on a date where she wanted to explore an abandoned asylum in VA. I noped out when she wanted to go to the operation theater, and the crematorium. I learned a lesson to never date a chick who claimed to have been one of the Salem Witch Reborn. My stepdad got pissed drunk, pulled a gun and shot up the house. He was pointing it at my mom, threatening her, and I'd just go in front him. He pushed me and I just kept backing him up, calmly talking to him, keeping the gun pointing somewhere else. The sight on the gun scratched my belly and I didn't notice it till later. Usually under stress I freak out. I can't handle driving in Indianapolis without screaming and beating my steering wheel. I don't know how I remain so composed. It was unsettling for me because I don't know where that came from. In that moment I don't know what I was doing, I was just doing it. No one was hurt and he just spent the night in jail. He's been going through some serious addiction issues. He lost his dad and a twin brother back to back, and he's losing his mom. When I was growing up, my dad had a private investigator follow us around. We found out about it from a friend of the family, as the PI approached my friend's mom after he had trailed me to their house a few times in one day. After I left, he went and had a chat, paid them to not say anything, but they did anyway. We later found out he had approached like 6 or 7 other friends' parents about the same set of questions. After we found out, we had another 9 years of being followed, constantly looking over our shoulder for a gold Chevy with blacked out windows. Every time we'd spot it, there he was with his camera. There was nothing we could do, as he had broken no laws. Going to the mall? There he was. Going to a friend's birthday party? There he was. Found out about it in 1991. Stopped caring about it in 2000. FYI, got back in touch with my dad when I was 29, in 2009, and have seen a selection of the pictures that were returned to him, so at least my mother and I know it had been actually happening all those years. Walking home from my friend's house late at night. Some guy followed me for blocks. What creeped me out the most, all his windows on his station wagon were covered in foil. I was watching Paranormal Activity 1 in my basement back in the day when it first came out and was considered scary. During one of the nights in the movie, when the house is quiet and we're listening for creaks and objects moving, all of the lights in my house go out. We lost power and I'm sitting in pitch black darkness. I nearly shit myself. This happened when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. My brother, who's 1 year my senior, suggested we go out to play since it wasn't as cold as the day before. It was fall, I believe, partially because it was only 5 or 6 in the afternoon and it was already pitch black outside. Anyways, we're running around in the dark, playing some game where we're ninjas and we have to hide besides a parked car in my driveway. Staying in character, my brother and I peer over the car to where we can see over the fence that separates our driveway from my neighbors and a clearing in the sky where there weren't trees to obstruct our view. And that's when we see it. The only way I can describe it is that it looked similar to the spacecrafts NASA uses to launch astronauts into space, except it was silver. Not only that, but it emitted this blue tint around its entire body, like it was glowing or something. I was so awestruck by this mysterious sight that I didn't take my eyes off of it for a second. The spacecraft itself stayed perfectly still in the sky, and for a moment I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, until it moved from one end of the clearing to the other in a millisecond. When it moved, it left behind the same color blue trail in the sky from where it had previously been, and the light from the trail shined bright at first, until it slowly started to dull down. It moved faster than anything I had ever seen, and after it moved, it stayed perfectly still in the sky again. My brother and I stood there, not saying a word. It wasn't until this overwhelming fear struck me, and with shaking fingers, I grabbed onto my brother's sleeve and told him we should go inside. To this day I still don't know what that was. I've looked into military planes and spacecrafts, but I've never seen a single one that looks anything like what I saw that day. My brother still remembers, and despite the fact that we rarely bring it up, I know we're both still fascinated by what we saw that day. My cousin was staying at her house for a weekend. My sister was good friends with her and they were set to sleep in the basement together. Me, being the younger sister, desperately wanted to stay down there with them. I fell asleep and had the most terrifying and realistic nightmare of my life. They went into the bathroom and came out as monsters who told me I had to fall asleep or they were going to eat me. For years I thought I had actually had that nightmare and it still scared me to think about. Last year my sister admitted to actually doing that and I found out it wasn't a nightmare but they tortured me like that for real. This actually happened to my brother 2 weeks ago in the house we grew up in, so, my brother still lives there with my grandma. Brother's room is in the basement. In the living room, there is a huge glass sliding door that opens onto our deck, with a large shared courtyard behind it. At about 2 a.m., my brother hears this door slide open. He is still up gaming or whatever. He yells, "Hello?" and hears a man's voice, say hello back, very calmly. Scared, he yells, "Who is this?" and the man calmly replies, "John." "Well, John, this isn't your house so you better leave," and John replies, "Well, it used to be," as he walks towards the kitchen and opens the fridge. My brother assumes from the noises he hears. Scared, my brother stays downstairs and calls the police. It takes the police over 30 minutes to respond, if you can believe that, and by the time they get there, There is no man in the house or any trace of it. My grandma has owned that house for 25 years. As a child my dad was a drunk. One night my dad and I alone camping in a yurt went four-wheeling at midnight. He was wasted. It was a jacked-up old Ford Ranger, being a pretty light truck. When my dad hit the edge of the cliff on our way back, it was teetering on edge. My dad told me to get out. I was maybe 5 to 6 years old. Truck was stuck, so we walked back to camp. It was about 2 miles away. Halfway there my feet got tired, so my dad put me on his shoulders, looking behind him. I stared into the green eyes of a giant mountain lion following us. The increase in stature scared him off, and I watched him book it up the mountain. Haunts me to this day. I used to date a girl who had a small dog and a daughter, who at the time she was about 4 years old. One night we were laying in bed trying to go to sleep and the dog came running into a room, which isn't too uncommon. Her dog went from my side of the bed and stood up, and then went under the bed to the other side of the bed and stood up. When she was on my side I would look over and pet her, and when she was on my ex's side I would roll over and play with her again. This happened a handful of times. On the last time, she was on my ex's side while we both played with her and she ran under the bed, so I rolled over. There was a little girl standing right in front of me in a pitch black room with her hair fully covering her face. I was never as scared as I was that night. I screamed so loud she started crying and I realized who she was. It was her daughter who came into our room after not being able to sleep. I went to my college orientation, and they had a ghost tour since our school was known to have some ghost stories on campus. I'm a fan of supernatural, so I kept joking that we should bring salt. We were in front of a fountain. I was surrounded by maybe over 30 people and the orientation leaders and 2 alums who run the tour. I was in the front of the group, listening to a girl talk about her experiences. All of a sudden, I feel someone pull me back, like grabbing my arms. I started to cough profusely and literally turned around and pushed my way out of all the students there and started to cry hysterically. During that day, my eyes were red. I had seen an excessive amounts of pen markings on my foot and white sandals. I tried my best to clean the shoes when I discovered the markings. Fast forward to the following week, I go to my internship and I wear the sandals. I look down, and there's nothing there. There are no signs of pen markings and it looks brand new. To this day, I don't really understand what happened. We were driving in the mountains in Colorado with some friends on our way to a ski lodge in Telluride. On the way to our hotel we were driving up and down these winding roads deep in the mountains, which seemed like forever. It was pitch black outside at around 3 a.m. and we had to at least be 45-ish minutes from the nearest town, and it was cold, like see your own breath below 10 degrees freezing cold. As we were driving along, my friends and I all see 4 figures walking on the road coming towards us. We all get weird feelings inside, but I did especially, and the hair on my neck stood up. Something didn't seem right. We were way too far away from a town and it was way too cold for hitchhikers or hikers of any sort. We get closer and closer, and as we got right next to these people we slowed down and we realized that they had no faces. 4 people walking in the dead of the night wearing black hoods and cape-like gowns, and they literally had no faces. And by no faces I mean like no eyes, mouth, ears, just blank white pale faces. I'm familiar with ski masks and these were not ski masks. They had hoods on like something from Scream almost. My friends and I all freaked out speeding away, and my toughest manliest friend of us all was crying. Mind you, he was in his late 20s. It was the most afraid I've ever been and it still scares me thinking about and typing out. No idea what they were or anything. Demons maybe? It will forever be a mystery. We didn't sleep well the next few nights/months. November 8, 2007, I watched as a drowning victim was pulled from a local lake. He was an older guy, maybe 60, dressed in biking gear. A pair of runners, and I discovered him floating about 10 feet from the biking/walking path, and while the woman ran to get help, cell phone signal was poor. The male went down into the lake to pull the guy out. Another couple stopped, and while the man helped the first guy, his female partner gagged. I was almost in shock. I just couldn't believe this was happening. When they tried to give him CPR till the paramedics arrived, I could tell the old man was already dead. Blood was coming from his nose and his gaze was fixed and clouded over. We had to give statements to the police as the rescue team worked in vain to bring the victim back. They put these quick warming things on him and took him away. Every time I return to the lake, I always think of that man and his watery death. I was returning a lawnmower to my dad's warehouse. He was waiting outside, one night, and suddenly the lights went pitch black and an alarm started blaring. Turns out I entered right before the security alarm system activated. In addition to my dead cat story, I was at a family restaurant when I was a kid, maybe 5 or 6. A little backstory: I grew up in a country where Asians were scarce. I was eating and minding my own business while the grown-ups talked. Then from around a corner, I see a huge camera pointing at me. I could hear the shutter go off as the guy took pictures and a girl next to him giggled. Both looked about in their 20s. I tugged at my mom's arm, but when she looked, the two people ducked out of sight. When coast was clear, they started taking pictures again. It's been 20 years now, and somewhere somebody has stalkerish pictures of me as a child, and that's a very disturbing and unsettling thought. I have none that I can remember, but according to my mom, when I was a baby, I slept in a crib in her room. She snapped awake one day in the middle of the night to see a figure standing in front of my crib. She said it looked exactly like my great-great-grandma, who died only a few days after I was born. We were both in the same hospital at the same time. The figure turned and looked at my mom, smiled, and then vanished. We don't know if it really was my great-great-grandma wanting to see me one last time, or if it was a demon wanting to hurt me, or an angel. My mom said she heard somewhere that angels will sometimes take the form of a deceased loved one when visiting people. Not me, but my relative. Moved into a new house, daughter started acting strange. Let's call that daughter Susie. When Susie played by herself, she would talk, claiming that she's playing with a girl, but there was no girl. She also described the girl as tall and long-haired. Her parents told her not to talk to that girl. Days later, Susie tells her parents that the girl kept pestering her when ignored her. The family decided to move out the house shortly after. The most unsettling part was that the girl wanted to follow Susie to the new house so they could play together. But everything was normal after they moved. Fast forward a few years later, when her uncle died, we had to put his urn in those cabinets at the cemetery. Guess who saw her uncle standing there while the urn was placed? No one saw it except Susie. I was about 12 or 13 years old. One time I'm walking to my psychiatrist for my weekly appointment. It's a half-hour walk in after dark. I enjoyed walking, especially after dark when things were quiet, peaceful, and slow and no one else around. No, I didn't live in a dangerous neighborhood, nor did my walk take me through any dangerous neighborhoods. As I'm about halfway to my destination, a car, a Cadillac, comes driving down the street. Some people, both male and female, in the car are sticking themselves halfway out the windows and are taunting me and jeering me as they drive by. A bunch of people in their late teens or early 20s. I ignore them and keep on walking. About a minute or two later, the same car comes down the street again and those people are jeering me and taunting me again. I don't know who they are. Maybe they live in the neighborhood. I still ignore them and keep walking. Another minute or so goes by and again they come driving down the street, taunting and jeering me. Now I'm worried. They're circling the block over and over, deliberately focusing on me. As soon as they reach the corner and make their turn and are out of sight, I duck behind some bushes in someone's front yard and wait. The car comes again down the street. This time, not seeing me walking down the street, they're not jeering. They pass right by me in my hiding place and turn the corner. I think they think I've finally reached my destination, one of the houses on the block, and went inside and as a result, drove away. I thought wrong. Stupidly I leave my hiding place and go back to walking on my way to my psychiatrist. I should have stayed there behind those bushes much longer because I hear the car approaching. They spot me and start taunting and jeering me again. They turn the corner. This time I run towards my destination, but I know I won't get far before the car and those kids catch up with me again. So to that effect I decided to hide again behind the bushes in front of an apartment building. This time resolving to stay there for good until the thugs in the car gives up their searching for me. I'm hiding there behind the bushes for not long, maybe about 30 seconds or so, when the guy whose apartment it is, pops out from his apartment, asking what I'm doing hiding in his bushes. At first he probably thinks I'm a burglar or something, but I explain to him how I'm walking to my psychiatrist and how I'm being followed and harassed by a bunch of kids in a car, which was why I'm hiding in his bushes. The guy can instantly tell from the tone of my voice and my facial expressions that I'm telling him the truth. He can see how scared I am. Just then the car comes down the street and pulls right up at the curb directly in front of us. They look at me and the guy I'm with. Not a mean-looking guy, in his late 30s early 40s, but tough and serious looking enough. He's not wearing a shirt. But he's wearing a sleeveless undershirt which reveals that this guy's upper body is very well toned, slightly muscular, and no fat. I'm looking at the car and I realize that the car doesn't look so full now. It's missing a few people inside. The guy I'm with just gives them a mean stare. He asks me, "You know them?" I explain that no, I don't know them at all. I haven't the slightest idea of who they are. Just then, as the car is sitting there, about 3 of them approach walking from the other direction. The car was traveling from east to west. Those 3 were walking on foot from west to east. So that's why the car seemed not so full. They were looking to escalate the situation. They weren't satisfied with just driving by and taunting me, so they changed tactics. A few of them got out of the car up ahead and started walking towards me while the ones in the car took another turn around the block. Their plan now was to physically trap me in between themselves and their car. Perhaps grab me and drag me into the car with them for whatever reasons, but seeing my tough guy guardian angel with me, the kids walking towards the car instead got into the car and it took off. The guy offered to stay with me for a little longer if I wanted to duck into his apartment to stay there until I was sure that it was safe to continue on my journey. I had a feeling that this was the last I was going to see of those guys in their car and I didn't want to be late for my appointment. So I thanked the guy for his offer, but declined. And decided to head on my way. The guy went back into his apartment and closed the door. I looked at the closed door and hoped that I didn't make a mistake by turning down the guy's offer of better safety, because I was still scared. Thankfully I was right about not seeing the car again. The rest of my walk I was unmolested. I reached my psychiatrist's office. I told my therapist about what happened. He insisted on calling the police. The police came and took a report from me. That's the last I heard of it. On my way back home, I usually took the same route that I came from, up the same streets. But this evening, I varied my way home, taking some different side streets to walk on. Never saw that car or those jerks again. Here is, via Google Street Search, the very spot I hid. That door was the guy's apartment. That grassy area behind that low black metal fence on the left was where the bushes were that I hid behind. Back then the bushes in that spot were way tall, wide, and thick. Enough to hide a 12 to 13-year-old kid behind. If I hadn't ducked behind those bushes, I would have walked right into their trap and God knows what they had in store for me once they had me trapped. But, when I was a kid, I lived in Uganda, Africa, and there were a bunch of homeless people in the city Kampala. At about 5 or 6 years old I would follow my mom out of the house whenever she would get ready to head to work at a research facility. For context, in Uganda there are these little spots where guys on motorcycles gather as motorcycle taxis. My mother gets on a motorcycle taxi and leaves me there. This wasn't so bad as I lived just a short 3 to 5 minute walk away. This particular time, as I walked home, a homeless looking dirty dude starts following me and I get scared and I start to jog home and he speed up and I break into a sprint. As soon as I started sprinting so did he and he chased me all the way back. My aunt was on the balcony of our house and saw me and yelled "Run at me," or so I remember, and she sprints around back and opens the back door and I sprinted around the house and into the door. There were a bunch of doors to other buildings back there and he never saw the one I got into. What I can saw for sure is that I probably have never run so fast in my life and that the people in the apartment complex put together money for 2 guard dogs on the premises. Never knew why the dude chased me. Used to work in a psych unit. Walked in on a guy who was writing Bible quotes all over the wall in his own blood. He turned and looked at me with a feral, inhuman look. I'll never forget that. Sent shivers up my spine. I saw true madness that day. I am an American engineer. I sometimes do field work and sometimes that involves traveling to poor countries. Guy I worked with, local electrician. Was friendly. Spoke fluent English. Would always show me pictures of his daughter. We hit the bar last night. I am there sitting in back of a bar in Mexico. He tells me why he immigrated and about being an enforcer for the cartels and protection rackets in Haiti. Explaining why he could never go back. I am listening to him confess and thinking the whole time about the number of ways he could have killed me and made it look like an accident the past 10 days. It really has changed the way I trust people when I am in the field now. The other night, my friends and I were buzzed and were wandering around a few blocks. We thought we heard firecrackers down the street a few blocks away. Found out after we got back home that someone had been shot around that area at the same time we were near there. On the upside, the dude was shot in the buttocks and the first comment on the news article was Lieutenant Dan, ice cream. I was hunting elk in Colorado several years ago, grumbling about how cold it was as I was marching to the road to be picked up by my father as dusk creeped in and fresh snow drifted down from the sky. As I was trudging away I felt the hairs on the nape of my neck stand on end, did a quick about face and saw nothing, and proceeded to walk a little more briskly down the trail while gazing over my shoulder now and then. I still couldn't shake that feeling, and as I walked down the road I crossed a set of what I could only assume to be mountain lion tracks. I'm familiar with bobcat, they're plentiful in my home state and these were much too big. As I'm walking it dawns on me that with the fresh snowfall these tracks must be fresh as well. They zigzagged off into the tree line and back onto the trail my entire walk out. Never saw it, didn't want to, and was quite happy when I got back to my bunk in the cabin that night. Alright, I am a crazy kid, and I kept on jabbing my hand in a mirror because I thought a mirror was a portal to another world and I was just blocking it. I kept on trying to convince my 12-year-old self to leave. And for 1 second, his mouth moved when mine didn't. I think my mind was playing tricks, because it was 1 in the morning, but it still creeped out of me. The time I was mugged and attacked for kicks by a bunch of thugs on a subway train. This is rather long so please bear with me here. I was 13 years old in Brooklyn, New York. Just a week or two after my 13th birthday. A friend and I went to the movies about once a week. Normally we went to one of several movie theaters in his neighborhood. But there were times when the movie he wanted to see, he always picked the movie. I didn't care what he chose, I loved going to the movies regardless of what we went to see, wasn't playing in his neighborhood. So we would sometimes go to a theater outside his neighborhood. This particular time we had to go way out to Manhattan to see the movie, I have long since forgotten the title. We took a train out to Manhattan, saw the movie and took the train home. Because we lived in different neighborhoods, we had to get off at different stops. He got off his stop and I had to continue to the last stop so that I could catch a connecting train to take me home. The subway car I was sitting in was completely empty. So was the car next to it, which was the first car of the train. After sitting there in the empty car, I do not know what possessed me, but I decided to move to another car instead of sitting there in the empty car. I got up and moved into the next car where there were people. I decided to move even further to another car again. But some leather-jacketed guy got in my path and told me that the other train cars were closed. I knew this guy was full of it, but I didn't want any trouble from him. So I just said oh and turned around and went back into the empty car I came from and took my old seat. That guy and his friends took my response as a sign of weakness and cowardice, which it was. I was a meek little 13-year-old put upon abused kid with no confidence whatsoever. I was sitting there in my seat when a metal dart landed on the floor at my feet. Followed by an angry, gruff voice yelling pick it up. Pick it up. I looked over to my right and that leather-jacketed guy and his friends, around a half dozen or so, poured into the car and came straight at me. His dart guy friend was one of the first to reach me as he ordered me to pick up the dart again. I did so and then he ordered me to hand it to him. I did. Then he proceeded to throw the dart directly into my legs over and over again. I screamed and cried. I put my hands over my legs in an effort to shield them, but then he ordered me to move my hands away or else. I did and he proceeded to throw his dart into my legs again as he stood over me. My memory is a bit hazy as to how the rest progressed but I do recall them after the dart throwing they proceeded to use me as a punching bag. Fists flying into my face, chest, and stomach, not one of them at a time but several of them at the same time. I managed to break free of these guys and made a run for the car door so that I could escape into the next car where there are people. But one of them was guarding the door. This guy was not taking part in my torture with his friends. He just stood at the door as lookout. I could sense that this guy had some compassion for me. That he felt some sort of guilt about what was going on, which was why he wasn't taking part that I can recall. But as I reached the door, he still prevented my escape. I yelled, I screamed, I cried, I begged him to let me go. But he wouldn't. He threw me back to his friends. That guy, keeping me trapped in that car with his friends that very second, was the worst feeling ever. Somewhere along the line I found myself on my knees on the floor of the subway car. I reached into my pocket and pulled out all the money I had on me at the time. All the money I had in the world. A single dime. I held it out to them in the palm of my hand above my head and yelled at them that was all I had. Please take it and leave me alone." I felt a leather-gloved hand press into my palm and take the dime. But they still weren't finished with me. One of them got the bright idea that he wanted to see my head go crashing through one of the windows of the subway car. So they grabbed me, and actually started to ram me head first into the glass of one of the windows. Fortunately, subway car windows are strong and shatterproof. They had to be due to all the vibrations it takes from a moving train. I can't recall how many times they rammed my head into the glass. Somewhere from a half dozen to a dozen before they gave up. Just before we reached the last stop, I was on my feet. I opened my mouth to say something, can't recall what it was, and accidentally a little spittle came flying out of my mouth and landed on the leather glove of one of my attackers, which earned me a slap in the face. Finally we reached the last stop. The doors opened and they ran out of the car except for one guy who I assume was their leader. The same guy who at the beginning got in my path and told me the other train cars were closed. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet and asked me if I needed a couple of bucks. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want anything from him. I refused his offer and he put his wallet back and walked off the train. I went to the front car to report to the conductor that I was attacked. I banged on the door. But there was no one there. I walked off the train onto the platform. I changed platforms. I saw a couple of cops with their backs to me. They were exiting the platform by going down the stairs. I called out to them but they didn't hear me. I was too weak from the beatings to go run after them. They disappeared out of my sight. It was just as well. I never memorized my attackers' faces as I tried not to make eye contact with them throughout the entire ordeal. I had forgotten what they looked like within seconds of them leaving the train. I would never be able to give an exact, positive description. And I never knew their names, nor they mine. Defeated, I caught my connecting train. This time finding and staying in a car that was reasonably filled with normal-looking people. Second I got home, I flopped into bed to go to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, my body ached all over. I imagine my attackers, if they're still alive today, are somewhere in their 50s, at the time of their attack on me. They were all a few years older than me. I estimate late teens to early 20s. Some of them no doubt have families of their own today. Wives, grown kids, homes, good jobs, etc. But I'll also bet they keep it a secret from everyone in their inner circles, employers, co-workers, friends, family, about the time how they mugged and physically assaulted some young kid, a total stranger, for kicks on a subway train way back when. Their friends and families, wives and kids, probably look up to them, thinking they're the greatest, not knowing what lowlifes they really are and were. My life at the time and the many years following were terrible and painful for many reasons. Granted, they're not to blame for the entire terrible state that was and is my rotten life. To be fair, had I never encountered them, my whole life would still be terrible. But they sure did contribute to the lousy horribleness that is my life. I have never forgotten or forgiven them for the torture they inflicted on me both physically and mentally. I hope they all burn in hell. Dr. The time I was attacked and mugged for kicks on a subway train. Two things at the same place. I ride horses and both happened at the barn I was training at. When I was younger I would work at the barn to pay off extra rides. I was leading a horse out of the barn at night and all of a sudden the radio in the barn just turned on full volume. I freak out and sprint to the field with the horse on the line, let him loose and tell my mom what happened. She doesn't believe me, so we both walk in and the radio was still on but turned down really low. It was terrifying and would never be in the barn that late alone again. The second time was when I was a bit older and was riding in the indoor ring. The far side of it was completely open and was just dark, again at night during the winter. I knew my dad was coming, so I was looking out for him. As I was at the opposite end of the ring from the opening, I saw a man walk by from right to left wearing jeans and a black shirt, something my dad would wear for work, and then he disappeared to the other side. So I hurry over to him to say hi and there's no one there. I called out a few times but nothing. I look outside and there's no truck that he would have driven. The barn has been known to be haunted but never believed any of it until those two things happened. I was babysitting my, at the time, 5-year-old cousin. I was in middle school, we were watching some lame-ass kids show, and he turns around and asks, "Who is that?" I turn to see that my window blankets are open, so I walk over to the window, look outside, and see zero things outside. I asked him what it was he saw, and he responded that it was an old man and he was looking right at me. I noped all the way out of that room. Dream related, but not paranormal. When I was 14 or so, I had a dream that I was the main character from a game like Wolfenstein 3D or Doom or some such. Not a specific one, just generic FPS protag. I had a bomb, and I couldn't disarm it, and I needed to throw it somewhere far from me, but I was inside a building where I couldn't throw it very far because of walls. The walls were all closer than the blast radius. I needed to throw it outside the building. I scrambled to get to a window, and threw it out at great force, and then realized there was another building just a few yards away, and the bomb hit the other building so it didn't fly very far away at all, and exploded with me in the blast radius, and I woke up. My heart was pounding so fast when I woke up that it was painful, and I thought this must be a heart attack. I must be having a heart attack right now. I thought, oh no, the if you die in a dream you die in real life thing is real. I think that's the only time in my life that I literally thought I was in the process of dying. Thankfully, I was too freaked out to call for help, and it calmed itself down as I lay in bed for a few minutes. I've had other nightmares, but I think I've never had anything else quite like that experience. Feeling like my deceased great-grandmother was leaning over me while I was in the dark in bed one night. It felt like she was an inch away from my cheek. Quite terrifying, as that was on the anniversary of her death. That was when I first moved into my brother's bedroom after he moved out. About a year ago it felt like my cat was walking on my bed the night after he died. A lot of weird, paranormal things happened to me in that room. Coming back home from my deployment, I stayed at my parents' house for a few weeks while my late grandmother, who was suffering from severe dementia, stayed in the room adjacent from mine. It was around 2 a.m. when I'm awoken by a blood-curdling shriek that lasted for what felt like an eternity, but must have actually been about 30 seconds in just one breath. It turns out she was sleepwalking, tried to enter my room and slammed herself into the baby gate we had for my puppy. I honestly don't know what was more terrifying, hearing that shriek suddenly in the dead of night, or flicking on the dim ceiling lights and seeing her stare at me. Face was decrepit, mouth agape and her eyes wide as can be. It makes my blood run cold every time I think about it. Most unsettling, causing me to not sleep until I pass out from exhaustion? Watching the love of my life blow her brains out in front of me. I remember the texture, the taste of the mist in the air, the smell, everything. Here's something a little different than the paranormal / creepy shit going on here, but it certainly fits the topic. When I was a young boy, about 6 years old, my parents had decided to finally let me stop sitting in the seat of the cart at the store and follow behind them. I was a well-behaved child, I never touched anything. I never screamed when I didn't get what I wanted, and my parents could trust me to always be close behind them. As a reward for good behavior, my parents would often set me loose for a few minutes in the toy aisle to look at Lego sets, and if I was particularly lucky I'd get to buy one. So there I was at Kmart, holding the box to Jango Fett's Slave Eye in my hands, thinking of all the ways I could convince my parents to buy it for me. It really was a nice set, and the colorful box art had almost mesmerized my young brain. But alas, my time was up, and my father called sleepless, "It's time to go." From down the aisle, I put the box down and walked around the corner. I saw my mom and dad, both around the age of 30 to 40 at the time, and followed behind them for quite a while, like the good child I was. I looked around the aisles a bit, but I wouldn't say I was that easily distracted. Yet, somehow, when I looked at my father again, it hit me that this man wasn't my father. I was following an elderly couple, a man with a cane, a woman with gray hair, both in nice outfits, likely fresh from church, people who looked nothing like my parents. I could have sworn I was following my dad the whole time, but I ended up walking across half the store to find my parents. It was the most bizarre experience of my life. I couldn't fathom how I thought they were my parents or when the mix-up happened. I remember this so vividly. It was November 19, 1998. I got my Game Boy Color earlier that week when it was released, and this was the first night I got to stay up play Pokémon Yellow. It was past midnight for sure. I just got Charmander and my Pidgey was evolving. I was sitting in the living room on a couch wrapped up in a blanket. I noticed a car pulling up in front of my house, which wasn't too weird, but I kept an eye on it. 3 people get out, all of them seemed large, so I assume males. At this point it's suspicious. I was sitting in the dark so I could get the most out of my screen, so I'm sure they never saw me through the bay window. My gut starts to hurt as I watch them walking to the side door. I moved to the kitchen window and tried to pick up what they're saying, but I couldn't make out anything. It was at this point I look out the window and I see one of them carrying a bat or something because of the street lamp in front of my house. At this point I am freaking. I was too scared to run to my parents' room because I'd have to run past the side door which they're now at. I heard more talking than the door handle jiggles and turns, but the deadbolt stops them. Which is funny because my parents almost never use the deadbolt. We've never had a reason to, but my mother for some reason did that night. At this point I hear something that if I had to guess was, it's locked, which now that I think about it. Does that mean they tried it before and it wasn't, so they came back prepared? At this point they start to violently shaking the door. It seems so loud I thought it was going to wake everyone up. After a couple seconds they stop. I gather the courage to climb the counter to get a better look out the window. My face was inches away from the window when they came back through my driveway and past me. I could see their faces but not well. So close. At this point they go back to the car and I move back to the front window to watch. Two of them get back in the car and one has the door open and about to get on when he looks back and makes a hand gesture and starts walking back to the front door, which I'm right beside. Without even thinking I turn the deadbolt handle and I move back into the closet the door faces. I see the handle move. It wasn't locked. I start thinking, oh my god, what if the deadbolt was already locked and I unlocked it? The guy gives the door a push and deadbolt stops him. I hear another frustrated sounds. He leaves and get back in the car and I hear it take off, so I watch the car leave my street and I relax. So what does my 6-year-old mind think the next plan of action is? I go play more Pokemon until I pass out. I woke up and the fear hit me and the potential of what could have happened. I run to my parents' bedroom to tell them, but they sorta brush it off as if it was a dream. I felt like an idiot because no one believed me, but I noticed after that night all the locks were locked from then on in my house. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.